All right. Can everyone hear me? I hope so. Good evening, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Jay Carvin, and as the Director of Programs Co-Chair for the Association of IT Professionals, I'd like to welcome you to our annual panel of cybersecurity experts. Tonight's topic is preparing for the inevitable. Before we begin, please make sure to mute yourselves until we reach the end of the event, where we'll open it up for Q&A and an audience discussion. This meeting is being recorded and will be available to watch after the event at AITP-LA.org. I'll paste that link right here in the chat for you guys. Perfect. Real quick, let me just jump into AITP for a second. AITP is a nonprofit association and exists to keep members informed of cutting-edge technology trends and best practices, as well as provide local networking opportunities. With AITP-LA, you can share experiences, communicate with industry leaders, keep up with emerging technologies, enhance your skills, and contribute to the knowledge community. We hold in-person events and virtual events monthly. Our members include IT executives, professionals, consultants, attorneys, educators, and students. Meet people in your field of interest, build lifelong relationships, exchange real-life experiences with your peers, and polish your leadership skills and discover career or business opportunities. Stay on top of industry trends and emerging technologies. Also show your commitment to the IT profession and provide a voice for the future. Membership is still free through the end of the year. If you're interested in becoming a member, please type the word membership in the chat, or you can email us at membership@aitp-la.org, and I'll put that email here as well. All right. Here are the current board members that make our programs possible. If you have any interest in serving as a board member or just being part of our strategy planning for 2024, please type the word strategy in the chat, and we'll make sure to get back to you after the meeting. Upcoming events. The first event that we have after this will be November 30th. It's a Cybersecurity Summit held at the Beverly Hilton. There's actually two keynote speakers, Jeffrey Aguilar, the CISO of the County of Los Angeles, and Michael Son, who's a supervisory special agent for the FBI. Admission is normally $195, but since we're sponsoring the event, we have a code for a free pass. Feel free to use that. A link to the summit is there, and I will put the code in the chat as well. The next event will be our 2023 annual holiday event. This time we're teaming up with a couple different groups. The Information Systems Security Association of LA, the Women's Society of Cyber Jitsu, and OWASP Los Angeles. We'll have more information going out in our newsletter, so make sure to stay tuned for that. And last but not least, we have a January event, date to be determined, but we'll start off, it'll be about starting 2024 off right with goal setting. Our speaker will be business coach and author, Terrence Minoy. All right, so now for the main event. I'd like to introduce our moderator and then some more panelists. Our moderator is Dr. Stan Stahl. He's the founder and president of Secure the Village, a nonprofit organization with a mission to make LA the safest or the cyber safest city in America. He received his Ph.D. in mathematics from the University of Michigan, then began his career as a research scientist at MITRE in 1980. He secured top secret teleconference and database systems for the White House, Cheyenne Mountain, and America's nuclear weapons arsenal. In 2002, he founded Citadel Information Group, now part of Miller Kaplan, which brings sound information technology practices to small and mid-sized organizations. He's authored The Agnostic Patriot, a citizen searches for the soul of America. And you can catch his weekly podcast, Live on Cyber, on all major platforms. Hey, Stan, thank you for being moderator for our event. Next, we've got one of our panelists, Scott Koller, is a partner at Baker and Hostetler. He's a highly skilled privacy and data security attorney specializing in data breach response and security compliance. He has counseled hundreds of clients in investigating and responding to an event compromising information and system security, working closely with client resources, third-party forensic consulting experts, and law enforcement to identify the nature and scope of a compromise. Scott has represented numerous organizations, including healthcare providers, financial institutions, hospitality providers, retailers, and professional services providers in inquiries by regulators, including the state attorneys general, state insurance departments, state health departments, the FTC, SEC, Department of Health and Human Services, and the Office for Civil Rights. Man, that's a lot. Scott, thanks for joining us tonight. Next, we've got Carol. Carol Gonzales currently serves as CalPoly Pomona's AVP for IT Security and Compliance and Chief Information Security Officer. She has over 30 years of experience in cybersecurity, audit, product management, and IT service operations within government, higher education, and financial service sectors. Carol also serves as an adjunct professor for CalPoly Pomona's College of Business Computer Information Systems Department. Carol is an active member of ISACA since 1996 and currently serves as the Los Angeles chapter's president. Carol has a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science, a Master's of Science in Business Administration with an emphasis in Information Systems Auditing from CalPoly Pomona. She earned her doctorate from Claremont Graduate University in Information Systems and Technology. Carol is a certified Information Systems Auditor, certified Data Privacy Solutions Engineer, and has an ITIL v3 Information Technology Infrastructure Library certification. Carol, thanks for joining us tonight. Last but not least, we've got EJ Hilbert. He is the CEO and CISO for KCE Cyber and KCE Advisors. Over a career spanning more than 25 years in the security domain, he's held a multitude of distinguished roles, including serving as an FBI agent, heading security enforcement at MySpace, operating as a CISO, and establishing his own online investigation firm. His impressive career includes serving as a consultant to diverse industries, investigating breaches at defense contractors, offering guidance to the C-suite and board of Fortune and FTSE 100 companies, and collaborating with various governments, including those of the UK, US, Russia, Greece, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. His extensive training encompasses forensics, risk analysis, risk mitigation, investigations, regulations, privacy, and compliance. His accomplishments include leading investigations that led to the creation of PCI DSS and bringing treason charges against American Al-Qaeda member Adam Gadon. EJ, pleasure to have you here tonight as well. All right, without further ado, I'd like to bring on Stan, our moderator.
Sure. Good. Jay, thank you so much. Thank you to AITP-LA, Roger, Nilu, all of you. Thank you. And my God, just listening to the bios as you read them, we got a hell of a panel tonight. I mean, we got some real talent here, and I'm just, hope I can keep up with all of you. First, just a couple of thoughts, just as we get started. First, this is not going to be a bunch of people pontificating from on high as to what all this stuff is all about. Carol, you said it as we were starting about this is a conversation, and cybersecurity itself is a conversation. We still don't share the language and have the kinds of discussions that we need to have. So those of you in the audience, so to speak, you're not in the audience, you're just part of a conversation, and we want to bring you into that conversation as we kind of go along. We've left a lot of time for discussion, for conversation with you. Just a general principle of who I am and all. Friend of mine's a retired Army colonel, and I see him regularly, and he talks about, we take our subjects seriously, but we don't take ourselves seriously. And I'm a big proponent of that. We got to be able to laugh even as we cry at some of the stuff that we see. Use the chat, put questions in the chat if you've got them. And we'll kind of navigate around getting to them. As I said, this is going to be a conversation, not a lecture. But just to put why we're here in context, and it's part of taking the subject seriously. It was about a year ago, Thanksgiving last year, I met somebody whose career has been spent, she's still in it, in helping victims first of abuse, and most recently of cybercrime victims, scam victims, businesses, individuals. And when I met Debbie a year ago, she's up in Ventura County. She asked me if I knew anybody, any place where this couple could find a place to live. They needed some place to live. And I said, why, like, what's wrong? And well, they lost their house. Well, why did they lose their house? Well, because they had a cybersecurity incident in their business and they lost their business. That's the kind of situation we find ourselves in. City of Long Beach was just hit today. I don't know if you've seen that in the news. Big companies are under attack, MGM being just one illustration of it. Small companies even more so, and Los Angeles is a small business community. According to Verizon, 3 out of every 5 incidents affects small businesses. That's an enormous number. Small businesses don't have the resources of large businesses as well. Oftentimes, small businesses are their cybersecurity is managed by IT professionals. The group we're speaking to tonight. So it's this message that we have is really important. In some sense, you're the point of the spear to protecting all the clients that you have, whether it's multiple clients, like EJ and Scott, or like I have, or Carol is one company, but you gotta, it's heads down, just focus. You gotta, you're it. That's also an opportunity we got to learn from each other, and that's kind of what today is about. It's also what Secure the Village is all about. We got a grant from the Center for Internet Security to put a pilot program together, and we are actively looking for IT service providers and MSPs to join us in that. So please go to our website, take a look at our program, and and this is all talking about how small businesses mostly can protect ourselves. We get to learn from you, Carol, in these kinds of situations. One of the things, this is one of your question, Carol. I love it. When I started asking the members of the of the panel, for questions to ask, and Carol, you said, what keeps you up at night? And so I'm going to go around and give every panelist a little chance to kind of say a few words about themselves, including what keeps you up at night. Then we'll get started on the formal kind of discussion. What keeps me up at night is this deep challenge we have, where all too often business owners, the people who have to provide the leadership and the resources, the money to do what needs to be done, they don't get it. They don't understand it. They're living in denial. They think it won't happen to them. It's some other problem. Nobody wants my information, blah, blah, blah. Those are the things that keep me up at night. How do we help break through that mindset? And again, that's a piece of what the pilot program is designed to do. With that, Carol, I'm going to pass it over to you. Say a few words about yourself, your context, and tonight, including, please, what keeps you up at night.
So thank you all very much for having me, and for the great and warm introduction. And so, as was mentioned, I work at CalPoly Pomona, and I service students. That's my audience, but it's not just the students. It's faculty, staff, students, families, right? And when you talk about students, in some cases, a lot of them are the most vulnerable, right? A lot of our students are on financial aid. And those perpetrators know when they get those checks, right? And those people who get those checks are the most vulnerable. And so they know our business cycle, right? And they know when they get that check, and that's when they send those phishing messages for those job offers. And you think, well, they've got to know, right? But when you're vulnerable and when you're desperate, you will respond to those messages. And you sit there and think, well, but it's obvious. But when you're desperate, right, that's when you're most likely to respond to those messages. Yeah. And so, and I worked service desk for a number of years, right? And that is probably the best training that I had for the job that I have, right? When you're answering those calls and you're helping users. So a lot of the context for what I do comes from an educational mindset and from a service mindset. And, a lot of people think about red teaming and, we're going to go after the vulnerabilities, and I'm a system administrator. I start with an educational mindset, because if I can educate those users and those families, I think that's the best chance we have, because not one of us can do this by ourselves. It is going to take a village. My dad used to say the dog that dug himself out of the yard, he's got all day to think of how to dig himself out of that yard, right? He's looking at that fence all day long, right? We're at work, we're doing all these other things. And that's what those cyber criminals have. They have made a business out of it. And that's what they're focused on 100% of the time. We're focused on our businesses. Security is a part of what we do, right? But that's not our core competency necessarily as a business, right? Ours is educating students from our perspective, right? Security's, a subdomain of what we do. So when you talk about what keeps me up at night, it's those families, it's those students. My life isn't the same. You talked about those small businesses. I've had those calls from the students who've lost thousands of dollars, right? And those moms and those dads and those caregivers, right? When they've lost that money. And that's what keeps me up at night. And you don't forget that feeling. And it's my data. People go, well, what do you care, Carol? It's not your data. It is my data. If you looked at my profile, I'm a student. I'm an alumni of CalPoly Pomona. I have 2 sons who've graduated here. I have another son in the CSU. My data is here. My husband's data here, because I get benefits. I've got payroll here. So if you don't think I take it personal, I take it real personal. So that's what keeps me up at night.
That's a great answer. That is fabulous, Carol. Yeah. And we live in that same space. I mean, the scams that individuals are getting hit by are just, it's devastating when that happens to them. I want to move on. EJ, you see a different piece of, just a sidebar. One of my favorite metaphors is the story of the blind man and the elephant. If you know it, each of the blind people are seeing a different part of the elephant, and they think that's this whole thing that they're dealing with, when in reality they're each just seeing a piece of it. EJ, you see a very different piece of this elephant. Share it with us and finish. What keeps you up?
Thank you for having me here, and we'll jump into this. I'm the only person on the panel that doesn't have a doctorate, so I'm the dummy here. I'm going to go with that to start off with. But look, you saw my background. I have a very eclectic background across the board. I started as a high school teacher and joined the FBI. Was one of the first cyber agents in the FBI. A few people realized the FBI did not have a cyber division until 2002. Prior to that, it was all white collar crime, and from there, MySpace, Kroll, PwC, and I am now a small business owner. I run my own business. KCE is actually my children's initials. So it's Kyle, Connor, and Elizabeth. So that's why we do the work that we do. And one of the things that I see, because I deal with everything from originally coming in, post-incident, this is what we need to look at, figure out who the bad guys were, actually chase them down, put them in jail, do all the forensics before this was even normal. Some of the software packages that we were utilizing, we were developing on the fly to make these things happen, back in 2000, 2003, 4, 5. But the interesting piece is cyber became an issue because of identity theft. It became an issue because it turned into a quality of life crime. It impacted the everyman, the everywoman at that time. And it was brand new. There was less than 200 agents at the FBI that did anything with it. Secret Service was working with it. There was no profession, if you will, that was around this at that time. And we've grown. And I'd like to say we're about 25 years old in terms of our profession as cybersecurity. And there are many different roles you can play in it. But over that growth period, it became an industry, and it stopped being a quality of life crime. companies started using systems, automated systems to look at this, that we started hiring people to do little bits and pieces. It became very minimally focused. You only do this piece, you only do that piece. You're very technical, you don't know this. And now it's changing back. The big fish are smart. They're locking down their systems a little bit harder. Cyber criminals by nature are lazy, and they are going to go after the low-hanging fruit, a term we don't use anymore, but we should go back to. And we are the low-hanging fruit. Small businesses, students, individuals, because we are on cycles in terms of how we get paid. Like Carol said, it's very clear what we're going to do. We're entering into the biggest scam period time frame of the year. And that's what keeps me up at night, is the fact that we have stopped recognizing this as a quality of life crime. We have stopped fighting it. We are now managing it. Companies manage crime at a very top level. Oh, we acknowledge that this might happen and it will be here. We acknowledge that this might happen. We don't actually go forward. The number of prosecutions against criminal or cyber criminals has dropped out the bottom. We rarely prosecute anybody anymore. People don't go to jail anymore. People like Albert Gonzales, who you may or may not know, Green Hat Gang, Operation Firewall. He was part of Carter Plan. He was part of my undercover operation that we took down. He got 50 years in jail for this. All right. A couple of years ago, the Bank of Bangladesh, almost $1 billion stole from them. They got away with $80 million. One person went to jail, and that was the banker who helped move the money over to the casinos in Macau. Nobody wants to seek prosecution anymore, and that means you as the victim, because we think it's somehow going to hurt us, and it's not. Everybody knows this happens. Everybody knows, and that's what we're going to talk about here today, and so on. This is a common piece of this. We need to change the focus. We need to go back to the idea that this is impacting us. It's a quality of life crime. We need to stop it, and we need to be willing to go forward and seek prosecution. Yeah. So that's what keeps me up, the fact that we don't do what I did 15, 20 years ago or whatever, and that's where we're at.
Yeah. Again, thanks so much. And again, as you say it, you put the responsibility back on the small business to have to deal with this. And I'm thinking now, and I'll get to you in just a second, Scott, but I just want to introduce the phrase security by design, privacy by design, concepts like that, so that, and prosecution by design, perhaps as well, EJ, so that it doesn't all fall on the shoulders of those who are least able to properly manage it. Scott, please, your introduction. You're the attorney here. So,
yes, I am.
Yeah.
So I'm a partner at Baker Hostetler here in LA, and my practice almost entirely is focused on incident response. It's helping companies and organizations of all sizes investigate and respond to security incidents and security breaches. So now what keeps me up at night is inevitably those late night phone calls from my clients that call and say, Scott, we're in the middle of an incident. Our systems are down. We need help. And that's really where I step into play, and where my practice is focused on. And what's interesting that I've seen, and I've been doing this for many years now. This started as a kind of a fringe area of the law. It was something that, just kind of doing it here and there, or, every once in a while when it came up, or if you were a healthcare entity, you might need some special, compliance assistance. And it originally occupied a small portion of my day. I used to be a litigator. Now it is encompassed not only my entire day, but we have a team of close to 40 attorneys at Baker Hostetler all throughout the country that do nothing but do what I do in terms of incident response, helping other companies. And hopefully that demonstrates the sheer volume of attacks, not first and foremost, but also the fact that nearly every single company, industry, business, large and small, faces these cybersecurity risks. So now to kind of bring it up a little bit more back to what really keeps me up at night is I have seen a remarkable shift in both the regulatory environment and the class action litigation arena. What we're seeing now, and I'll tell you from statistics, we're seeing year over year doubling in terms of the types of lawsuits that are filed against companies and clients, the types of regulatory investigations a lot of my clients are facing. A lot of regulators didn't know how to look into this issue. Now they're paying it a lot more focus now, and we're seeing more and more of our clients struggle with those investigations, struggle with the class action litigation and the plaintiff's bar. And it's getting to the point where you get hit with ransomware, you have an extortion payment once, and then you get another extortion payment to the class action plaintiffs for the same data breach. So that's one of the things that keeps me and my clients up at night.
Yeah, no, and that speaks to just the challenge for the victims, the people who are getting breached, just goes up because of what you just described, all those losses that they have. So I think this has been a fabulous introduction to get us started, if you will, in that we've set the stage for discussion. I mean, it's preparing for the inevitable. And Scott, I mean, if you've got 40 attorneys at 2,000 hours apiece, I mean, the amount of money that is going into breaches is far, far, far more than all we see reported, like in the IC3 reports and all, which talk about losses. They don't talk about the total cost. And you're only a piece of it. I mean, EJ, you play in it. Sometimes our firm, I also have the company, Miller Kaplan, Carol, when you have to call consultants and forensics experts and all. So it would seem that anything we can do, whatever we can do to either minimize the likelihood of an event or have sufficient preparation for the event that when it happens, we're able to quickly recover and get back to business. That sense of resilience is where we want to go. So years ago, when I was starting my consulting practice, somebody said, "Oh, read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People." And if you remember, habit 1 is begin with the end in mind. So we're going to do that. When you get that call, whether it's during business hours or in the middle of the night or something, Scott, talk to us. Give us an illustration kind of what's going on, what's happened, what do you got to jump in and do? How prepared? Just begin that discussion with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, my work starts when they've discovered the incident, they discovered the breach, they discovered the ransomware. That's really where a lot of my work gets started. Now, I'll give you 3 examples of kind of bad to good to best in terms of response. Okay, the average the best clients will call me up and say, "Look, Scott, we've had a security incident. We need to engage this particular vendor who we pre-identified. We want to get on a call in the next hour." I'll be like, "Great." They know exactly what needs to be done. They've identified the resources to assist them in that process, and I'm helping them with the initial engagement. And we involve attorneys at the outset so that we can assert the attorney-client privilege over the investigation. So again, that's how the best kind of clients approach. Now, there are some clients that what I would say is they call me initially and they don't know who they're going to call, but they know that, okay, well, we got to speak to an attorney, or they've called their insurance company and their insurance company's told them, "Hey, go call Scott, he'll help you out." But they're really not sure what to do, and that's perfectly fine. I'm here to guide them through that process. I'll be their Sherpa and help them through the investigation and response. And then on the other end of the scale, one of the most frustrating and worst types of scenarios scenarios is when I have a client that calls me and they say, okay, we're ready to do notifications. Or, we had an incident a couple of weeks ago, and it turns out it was bigger than we thought, and we need your help. That's the most frustrating experiences because, number one, they should have called me 2 weeks ago, and then number two, so much of the evidence that we need may have been lost. They may have done, a portion of the work, but they didn't factor in all the various notification laws into play. And so we're having to redo a lot of that work from the investigation standpoint. So that's what I would say. My initial call that very first time is, from good, better, and best. It's the ones that have know what they need to do. They know who they're going to call, and they've identified those resources in advance.
Yeah, well said. Well said for sure. And as I listen to you, I'm immediately thinking, EJ, okay, so now you're in a different situation. You're not on the legal side, but if you're like us, you'll get calls from companies, some of whom you may have engaged in already and done some work with, and others that may be calling you for the very, very first time. And they're interested. Give us a sense of what the world looks like when you get called in.
When the world looks like it, sort of like Scott gets a call of, we've had this happen, blah, 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 what do we do? And honestly, I usually say, okay, let's get your lawyer online. And if you don't have one, let's get one, primarily because, as Scott pointed out, we want to get some attorney-client privilege in place, though it's not going to hold up in a lot of different locations. We want that because we don't know what's really happening all the way through. As it is, I've said I have to leave the panel early because I'm going to be dealing with exactly that on a flight later on today. But the point is that 99% of the time they don't know what really happened. They think they know what happened. They think they have an idea about it, and they'll say like, well, it happened yesterday. No, it probably happened 6 months ago, but you only figured it out yesterday. Let's get a look at what's really going on. And then the other question I always have to ask is, what do you want to happen? Do you want us to stop it? Do you want to be able to recover from it? Do you want to do you want to prosecute these people? Do you want to go all the way through and get them involved and so on? And then another sticking point is, what data do you have? What data is not yours? And therefore, to Scott's point, what breach notification laws do you have? But more importantly, what contractual agreements do you have with your other clients that says you have to notify? 90% of my clients have a 72-hour notification requirement. 72 hours from the time that they know they've been breached, they are supposed to notify their client that says, hey, your data might have been touched. I want to bring something up because you said it earlier, Stan, when I said I was pushing this back on the small businesses or on the big businesses to pay attention and do something about it. You don't have to do it alone. One of the reasons there's a Scott and there's a Carol and there's a me and there's a you that do this is we've seen this before. We've been involved in this before. And though we really don't have Chatham House rules in the United States, those of you who don't know what that is where you can talk about everything that's going on. You can share the information, but you can't tell the nature of who shared it with you or the company they worked with. All right. But we use that, we share that, we talk with amongst each other. You have this organization to talk amongst each other. So it's not just on you. Use those resources. But to your point, it's usually a freak out. It's usually calm down, knee-jerk reaction. Can we shut down access and figure it out? And most importantly, and I'll say this to everybody on here, do not start your investigation yourselves. You all want to. You all think you know how to do it. All right. Just don't. we lose too much from that. So
yeah.
Sorry, I'm getting on my high horse again. I apologize.
No, that's okay. And to that point, go get on it, because part of that's going to be discussion later on, but you're going to leave early again because of client situation. So get it in now. Carol, the Pomona and IBM cost of data breach is such an excellent example. Illustrate, I mean, what's this stuff cost? And how those costs are allocated across very different dimensions of that. Absolutely good reference. And Carol, again, what's the world look like from your point of view when you have an incident? I mean, You know, again, you're not looking at across a number of clients, you're looking very specific at CalPoly. But what's that look like?
You know, what Scott and EJ are saying is so true. You got to just calm everybody down first and foremost and look at what, you know, what are you really looking at? And, you know, and I tell stories funny, so you got to forgive me because that's how I actually keep my sedative and I keep my, you know, all my medications down and keep myself out of the padded room. But I can't tell you the number of times I get a phone call from somebody who says, you know, by the way, your network's infected. It infected my device. And I just thought I'd let you know. And of course, that's always Friday at 4 o'clock, right? And I have to take a deep breath. I have to take everything seriously. I cannot blow anybody off, right? But you know, on the side, I'm chatting, you know, with our operations team and say, don't go home yet. Don't sign off. You know, I think we're okay, but because honest to God, right? If our network was infected, it wouldn't be a phone call, right? There'd be alarms, bells, and whistles going off. But again, I have to take everything seriously. And I have to talk to this individual on the other end, right? And say, so tell me what you're seeing. Let's talk for a few minutes, right? And it's a counseling call, truly, right?
Yeah.
And in our environment, it's not homogeneous, right? I don't get the luxury of being in, I used to work financial services. I'm not in a closed bank with, you know, a man trap and, you know, I've got personal devices up the wazoo, right? And in this particular case, the kid had 2 mobile devices, his laptop, and come to find out the devices were syncing with each other and they were cross-deleting the data. And to add to it, he goes, oh, I said, now, did you update your device, right? Did you take it down to bare metal? And he goes, oh, I downloaded this update from this website that my buddy told me about. I'm like, so I go to my operations team. I said, you're good, go home. I think we're all right.
Yeah.
And now I have a service desk call, right? You know, got to talk this kid down, but I have to worry about what he's going to say on social media now, right? Because he's probably already on Reddit, you know, telling the whole world we're infected, right? So I've got all that stuff in the back of my head at the same time. And then I can have the similar call with our executives, because let's say they've seen that Reddit post, right? Now I've got to, you know, I've got to dial that down too. And now I've got to produce the evidence, right? And, you know, and deal with all of that. So, you know, when you're dealing, you know, with those kinds of stories, and we get that, you know, more often than you'd like, right? You know, when you talk about, well, you know, how do you handle the situation and then, you know, and then when it really happens, right? You know, is it a breach or is it a leak? Right?
It's an event. It's an event. We'll leave it at that. Not an incident. It's an event.
Right. Exactly. Right. You know, I always joke like, well, we don't have to be breached. We give it away for free, you know, right. Because, you know, you don't know, right? Accidents happen, right? And so, you know, what really happened, right? And getting to the truth. And it isn't about hurting anybody. It's really about really trying to understand it. And you gave the elephant story, which is phenomenal, right? Everybody's got an aspect of the truth, and I've got to get to that truth, right? And people who know me, you know, I tell everybody I grew up in a dysfunctional family, which is like the best training for this job, right? You know, and understanding all aspects of a problem and pulling together, you know, all the facets of the story to the best of my ability. And it's not always the ones and the zeros in the computer. That's the easy part, right? It's the humans, right, that I've got to deal with. And then I know whether to call the consultants to help me with forensics, right? Or do I need to, you know, call our legal counsel? You know, who do I need to call? And like EJ said, which I love, please God, don't investigate it yourselves, right? God have mercy. Please don't touch anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Carol, I split that up between incident response and incident management. Incident response is how quickly we get in and fix or look at whatever it is, but incident management is forever.
Yeah.
It's all the other little stuff that comes into play, and we spend more time on the management side than we actually do on the response anymore.
Amen.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And that whole point, don't touch it yourself. I mean, Scott, you mentioned going in and there not being any logs, or, you get called after the incident, like a week later or 2 weeks later and what have you. And I've heard from our forensics teams that we work with, that it all too commonly happens that the logs just aren't there. Or to your other point, Carol, the communications plan isn't there. All of those kinds of
Well, and the
things.
techs want to, and God bless them, right? They're the brothers I never had, right? They want to go in and fix, right? That's our nature as technologists, right? We want to go in and fix, right? We're problem solvers.
Yeah.
But but we need to do our evidence collection. We need to, and we want to make sure that we weren't part of the problem first, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
When
get
I
our
used to-
change control and our evidence and all of that.
Yeah, when I was an agent, one of the problems where we'd come out to the client and say, okay, look, you have everything, you've done your work, this is what I need. I need your logs, I need this, I need this, I need this, I need this. And then you'd wait and wait and wait. And you go back and say, we need this, we need this. When I left the bureau and started doing the work otherwise, and I would go out to the clients and talk with them, I would find out that the answer was they never had it. And they didn't want to tell the government, and they didn't want to tell the lawyers, and they didn't want to tell anybody else, because somehow it made it sound like they were incapable of doing their jobs or unable to do their jobs. And that's not the case, folks. You are doing so many different things and responsible for so many different things that you just, to Carol's point, you just want to fix it and get it moving and move it on and so on. But the implications of what is happening. I used to notify companies that they got hacked, like Carol had said. And I would share with them. And literally some of the companies would be like, oh my God, the world's falling apart. And others would be like, so what? It's not my data. I don't care. It's not my stuff, right? That's all changed because of regulation. But to the point of knowing what you have, understanding what you have, and recognizing what it is, not beating yourself up because you don't have it. Recognizing what you have, recognizing what you're able to provide, tell that to your lawyer, your team, let them come up with an answer. And if it feels like they're judging you, well, they're not the right partner to be working with in the first place. That's not their job. Their job isn't to judge you. Their job is to protect you and help you out. But for the small business, recognize we don't expect you to have everything, but some of this stuff you can have, and you can pay attention to it. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of those things as we go through.
And the one thing I would tell as an auditor, and if you've taken any of the certifications, and I teach this in class, is if your management tries to make staff feel like it's their fault, I'll tell you the number one person who's responsible is management. And that's the answer on the test.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
They may fire you and then call Scott and he'll help you with your follow-up. Actually.
I'd say if
I'm
they
sorry, is this
fire
being
you,
recorded?
there's 1,000 other jobs out there for you
So
right now.
that's just
Very
the
good.
answer on the test. I didn't say anything.
Yes.
Hey, Stan, I want to just kind of outline, because you addressed logs, and I want to emphasize the importance of why we need that.
Yeah.
So very often people have a narrow mindset and they view this as kind of like, okay, it's an IT issue, something's wrong, I'm going to fix it. This isn't just an IT issue. There's lots of regulatory and investigation obligations that flow from the incident. Now, we use the logs to answer two main questions. One, how did this happen? So that we can take steps to prevent it from happening in the future. And if your logs only go back 30 days or 7 days, as is some standard Microsoft products, but the intrusion actually took place 45 days ago, well, you're not going to have logs that are going to cover the requisite time frame, and it's not going to tell us what we need to know about how this happened. The other question that logs help answer is what information is compromised. And that's important because, as you know, knowing what information is compromised is going to help us in terms of our notification obligations. I've had many an Office 365 business email compromise incident where we don't know what they accessed in the email account, but we know that they accessed something. And even if they accessed just one email account, if we don't know what email that was, we're stuck with assuming that they accessed the entire mailbox.
Yeah.
And that is radically increasing your exposure and liability. And before we move on, I'll leave you with one other story as kind of a story of warning that hopefully doesn't happen in your situation. I had one client that called me up. They had experienced a ransomware incident, and they said, "Well, we'll get on the phone. We'll get your IT guy on." And the guy's like, "Well, no problem. I've responded to it. I went ahead and wiped the server. I restored it, and we're back up and running the same day." And of course, well, now you've just wiped all. Did you preserve any of that evidence? You should preserve a copy of it. It's like, no, my priority was getting things up and running as soon as we can.
Yeah.
Well, I understand that priority, but again, you've kind of wiped our evidence. Now that had ramifications on two fronts. One, on the notification side, now we're notifying basically every single client of this firm that their information may have been compromised. That was one issue. The other ramification, which we learned months later, was on the insurance side. The insurance said, we're going to reject coverage because you didn't preserve the evidence, because you wiped it due to your actions of your IT consultant. We're not going to cover the cost of the investigation or the notification because we at the insurance company feel like the investigation could have ruled out access and therefore notification may not have been required. But because of your actions in not preserving that evidence, we're now going to reject this claim. And that can be a real frustrating situation when a company was just focused on trying to get back up and running.
Yeah.
I'll remind people, I don't know if you guys can see this. You can see that. You know what this
Yeah.
is? It's a portable hard drive. They are cheap. Go to Costco, 120 bucks, get a 6 terabyte hard drive and copy your dang logs there. Maybe you don't need them every single day. All right. But I'll tell you this. Standard ransomware is 6 months before you get the ransom. 6 months. If your logs are 30 days or 7 days or 45 days, you're still not going to have that data. All right. I'm not saying that you have to have a massive backup situation because we're small businesses. We recognize it, right? But there are literally methodologies where you can back yourself up, keep your logs and so on. Don't let them get overwritten. Every log program out there allows you to write your logs to an outside location away from your primary hard drive. All right. Add it into the approach and just make those copies because you're spending $100. Don't get me wrong. When it used to be like 25 bucks a megabyte or whatever it was when it was early on days, I get it. But we're talking terabytes of data that you can store. All right. Somebody once calculated out that a megabyte of data is 50,000 pieces of paper, fully printed out pieces of paper. Your logs are not that big. So do us all a favor and you do yourself a favor and think about picking one of those up and just backing it up. Just throw it on a backup so you got the data. And on the other side, back up your regular stuff so we can go, oh, that was on your computer before it got ransomed. Now we know what it is. And Scott and I can go, ooh, do we really need to worry about this or don't we? It's key. This is not 2000. It's not the 1990s. It's 2023. We can do this. Sorry, I had to jump in.
No, go. You're right on it. And
And I just put a
yeah.
link to, if you guys weren't familiar with the Move It security, it's a vulnerability in Move It. A lot of organizations use Move It. It's a secure file transfer protocol. And
it was
our perpetrators, used that vulnerability to get into a lot of organizations' data. National Student Clearinghouse is just one organization that became vulnerable to it. And I just happen to be familiar with it. It is what issues transcripts for a lot of learning institutions. And so this just happens to be what they have posted on their website. But in a lot of cases, if you get a notification from the National Student Clearinghouse that your data was, basically if you asked for a transcript during this period of time, you got a notification.
Yeah.
And it'll be very generic. It'll just say academic data.
Yeah, my
Right.
son
Yeah.
was involved in that too,
Yeah.
so I'm with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
very generic. To EJ's point, it's like, well, we don't know exactly what the data was. We just know that file transfer folder was vulnerable during that time. They can't prove that it was accessed. They don't know what data was in his academic record necessarily. They just know that it was around that time.
Yeah.
And whether or not it's getting changed.
Right.
We're to that point now where that data is being taken. You may not think that it's valuable. This is one of the other biggest problems that companies have, is they don't think the data they have is valuable, because we think in terms of, can I sell it? Will it open a credit card for me? Will I take out a loan for me? Will it do this, or this? That is not the number one threat anymore, people, from the data that you collect. We use there's 5 basic threats, but I'll break it down. There's crime because I'm making money. There's espionage because I want to steal what you're doing. There's warfare or disruption because I want to shut you down. There's activism because I don't like you and I'm going to try to embarrass you. But the biggest one that has really come into play recently has been manipulation. Stealing the data, taking that data to change the narrative or to guide you down a certain path or to discredit you in a certain way and put it out there. So the data you have may not be a credit card. All right. But you may have other data that can be used in collaboration to hurt somebody, other companies, other groups, and so on. And that is why it's important to keep it. Data is far more valuable than a credit card. I can blow through a credit card about $4,500 on a credit card usually before it gets flagged for fraud or whatever. And it's good only once. Let's be clear. All right. Maybe I get into a bank account. They take some money out. Usually it gets shut down unless you're really good and you get to a certain level. But data about an individual, I can continue to use over and over and over again. There was a scheme that went around the Riverside County where males were receiving emails that said, I know you were looking at XYZ porn site. I am going to tell your wife you're da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Now some will be like, so what? But others are going to be like, oh my God, that's going to ruin me, because I work in a church or moral turpitude or whatever the things are. I share that with you. This is one of the reasons that just fixing your system and building it back up to Scott's point, and then notifying, you got to know, you got to think like a bad guy. What are they going to do with this data? And understand, this is why people need to know. I mean, You'd want to know if your financial records, your school records, your divorce records, your bank account, whatever was taken, you'd want to know, right? So that's what your clients do. Your customers want.
Yeah.
They want to know if it's taken.
Yeah, well said. I've just sat and listened to this conversation between you, EJ, and you, Carol, as it's gone on. But first, it's absolutely right on, helping to kind of set the stage. What are we talking about? From tone at the top, the people at the top don't have a clue. IT people who, in all good faith, want to get back to work. I mean, you got to get your systems up and running. For God's sakes, there's stuff going on that we got to get done. The way that gets in the way of the evidence collection. I posted in the chat. New CISO, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, has come out with new resource, Logging Made Easy. So again, it's directed to the IT service providers in the community. And as much as anything else, as I was listening to this conversation, a few years ago, my wife and I were in New Zealand, and I forget which town we happened to be in. We passed a marquee, a theater, and on the marquee was written a great quote of William Gibson's, that the future is already here. It's just not widely distributed. It's not evenly distributed. And each of us, again, it's like the blind man and the elephant, each of us is seeing a different piece of this, bringing it together. I hope for the audience, I mean, the 25 or so, 20 of you here in following this conversation, you can begin to see the complexity of what we're talking about, and how it begs, literally begs, let's get our heads around it. Let's look at it not from the back end. We just got called because somebody got breached 6 months ago, didn't have any logs, discovered it a month ago, didn't know what to do with it, played with it, and then finally called Scott,
Yeah.
way after anything reasonable has been done, anything, might have been done. So let's begin at the front end. First, Carol, you talked about incidents and breaches and events, and we struggle with that. I follow what Verizon calls them, but I don't know that there's a standard. So let's start. Okay, what are we trying to do?
Stan and Carol and Scott,
Yeah.
I apologize. I got to step away because I got to go deal with one of these things. I'd love to hear what's happened, but please, thank you, everybody. Sorry to jump in on this, but please connect with me on LinkedIn if you're interested. Whatever, we'll go from there. And I hope I get another opportunity to meet up with you all later. And Scott, you're now on my Rolodex for clients to call when these things happen. So thank you so much. I apologize.
Super. Best success, EJ.
Thank you.
Great to see you as well.
Great meeting you, EJ.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
So let's jump at the front end and let's just get some basic nomenclature, if not for the world, at least for this meeting. When we talk about these things, what is it we're talking about? So I'm going to let you be the definer of the language for us, Carol.
From our perspective, or from my perspective, an incident is when you suspect it. You don't need to wait for the data to leave the station or to confirm the data's left the station. So like on our campus, we have something called suspect email. So, if you see something, suspect something, say something. So, we have a mailbox where our users can email and or they can call our service desk, they can contact me. But see something, say something. So, I joke about what keeps me up at night. Sometimes it's just that mailbox buzzing. And if it buzzes too much, then, oh crap, right? Because my students are my best eyes and ears. And I had a student call, hey man, I'm on my way to the beach, but I thought you should know. Right. And they're wonderful. When my son was a student here, he came downstairs. He goes, Mom, I thought you should know. Right. Because you know what? It gives me faith in humanity. People care.
Yeah.
Right? And, but that comes with trust, right? That you're going to do something, that you're going to at least look at it. Right. But an incident is when you suspect something. It doesn't have to be validated. And I think that's the misnomer. Is an incident means that it's already confirmed. And that's why people start to investigate on their own, because they think they have to prove it. And that's okay. You don't have to prove it. Just tell me what you think. And I'll take it on, right? Pass it on. I got big shoulders. It's all right. I'll handle it for you.
Yeah. First, I got to just say, when you talk to me about how students reach out to you and say, yeah, I think you need to see this, or you need to know this, that is such music to my ears. Because when we have users who are that engaged, now we're getting somewhere. It's a culture issue. It's what you talked about earlier, tone at the top. It's the owner of the business, Scott, who long before the incident calls his attorney or his IT service provider or whatever and says, hey, we got to get our heads around this stuff, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. That the common saying. So Scott, when you think about what you would like to see when you cut, and you mentioned it earlier, take us through what the beginnings of preparation start. Like, how do you prepare? How do you get your head around? What do we pay attention to? Even what needs to be in the plan? So take us through what some of that begins to look like, and then Carol, obviously, will come back to you for that same kind of a discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would start with first understanding the cyber risks that are out there. What am I facing as an organization? And whether it's ransomware, whether it's business email compromise, whether it's social engineering, what are the types of threats that are out there? Second of all, what type of data do I have that's potentially at risk from those potential threats? And then finally, how would a security incident impact my business? Would it shut things down? Would it result in having to do massive amounts of notifications, or would it be a minor inconvenience? I had one client that was just a old school manufacturing, didn't have any computer equipment in the back office. He's like, well, it'd be kind of annoying and I'd have to rebuild everything, but I'm going to keep going on. That's not a luxury most companies have these days, but for some it does. So, but you have to understand those risks. And once you understand them, you can then start preparing for them. And that typically is in the form of an incident response plan. Something that kind of gives you a rough idea of the tasks that need to be done in the event of an incident. I've seen so many different incident response plans. Some of them are like 100 pages. Some of them are a couple of pages. And it depends on what best fits your organization. But it starts there with a rough outline. And then the most important thing in most incident response plans in my book is going to be the last page, which is going to be your appendix, which details who you have to call and what resources available to you. Now, it could be if you're a small business, you're handling things on your own, but in other situations, you may have insurance options. And in other situations, you may be calling, EJ or somebody else for that assistance. But knowing who to call when that occurs, so that you're not trying to struggle and figure it out in the heat of the moment while the building's burning. Okay, you know who to call, who to reach out to, who will help you out with that process. And then the incident response plan gives you a rough idea that, of course, says don't wipe your servers immediately. Preserve that available evidence, because I know later down in my incident response plan it says I've got to identify what happened. I've got to identify what information was compromised, and walks you through that process.
Yeah. Also, Carol, jump in as well, augment and comment on what Scott said. And
the communication plan. I was just looking up a resource I could put in the chat for folks. Just looking at the CISA.gov list, and one thing they mentioned was press releases. What are you going to communicate? Having whatever that notice happens to be for you, something generic prepared. I think that's one thing that I've heard from several organizations, having that, in Scott's case, working with your legal department and having that pre-made and pre-ready. And you can have those. You don't have to know what the incident type, is per se, but have something ready to go. Because I think that's where people panic, is worrying about that communication.
Yeah.
In that appendix. Go ahead, Scott.
Oh, I was gonna build on what you said. It does not have to be that complex. It could be something as simple as, yes, we're aware of an incident, we're currently investigating, and we'll provide you more information when we learn more. I mean, it doesn't have to be overly complex and flowery and customized to fit every single situation, because it's really just kind of a reactive statement until you have the opportunity to figure out what's going on.
And the one thing I work on with our teams is, because I treat everything as an incident, like the little stuff, like a little phishing attack or whatever, we're using everything as practice, right? Bang on wood, even, when the big one happens, you talk about earthquakes or whatever, we're practicing all the time, right? With communication, with templates, with everything. And because I come from that service desk background, you have outages all the time, right? So incidents are anything, right? So you have IT incidents, and a cyber security incident is just a very specialized IT incident. So treat everything as practice, right? and
Yeah.
use that to hone it in. Cybersecurity is just something specialized. Everybody wants to think that it is different. It's not different, it's specialized, right? And the playbooks and everything that you're going to do, have those contracts in place with whoever your forensics teams are going to be, right? Know those experts that you're going to call, know what you can and what you can't do, and make sure your teams all know that. Know that it's hands off the keyboard, right? My teams are going to know that. They know to call me, right? And then it's going to be hands off the keyboard, and so that you get those guidelines. And I know you've got a question coming up on tabletops on that, but so when you have an outage, use that as a time to practice, right? When a server goes down, right, they don't know why it's gone down. I don't know why it's gone down, right? And use all of that as time to practice.
Mm-hmm. That's a profound statement, Carol. Truly, use everything as practice for the next time. And I mean, we are going to talk about tabletops and what to do and after a breach and things like that. But the whole idea that every day has lessons learned for the next day, that kind of frame of mind, if you will. The other piece I want to comment on it goes back to something you, Scott, said, that and I think appropriate, given that our audience are IT professionals. You're not business owners, except to the extent you may own your own business as an IT professional. But when you're delivering services to clients, it's not your own business. It's you're in that other role, so to speak. Then, and the point you made, Scott, and Carol and EJ made it as well. Just in some sense, knowing the boundaries, knowing, okay, you're IT and you're qualified. You got all kinds of great skills, and it's not about that. It's about what's the right lane here, and when's it necessary to, even if you're IT and you're looking at an incident, when's it even right to notify your client, the owner of the business, let's say, that you're working for. Sometimes you'll take care of these things potentially yourself if it turns out not to have been an intrusion of any kind. Other times you're going to see an intrusion, and Scott, I'm looking at your face, and it's like, by God, as quickly as you can, let somebody with authority know what's going on.
Stan, I want to do a detour, and I want to tell you a real life story of a client of mine that fits that exact scenario.
Yeah.
So I had a client of mine that was contacted by the FBI. The FBI reached out and said, "Hey, you have an unsecured FTP server. We just wanted to let you know." And the IT guy answered the phone. I was like, "Oh my God, thank you for letting us know. I'm going to change it right away." Immediately shut it down, put a password on it, secured it, was great. Didn't tell anybody. He just fixed the issue. Well, the FBI at the time ended up notifying the Office of Civil Rights, which is the entity that oversees healthcare organizations. And this was, of course, a medical practice. And the OCR has very strict timelines in terms of notification and deadlines. Well, when the OCR now reached out to this medical practice a couple months later and said, "Hey, we heard you had a security incident a while back from the FBI, but we never got any notification. What happened there?" And nobody in the organization knew. The privacy officer didn't know. The security officer didn't know, because the IT guy just kind of immediately fixed it and didn't really tell anybody. Well, I can tell you that was a resume generating event for that IT guy. He's no longer with that organization, and they were ultimately fined for not training that employee properly and not notifying on time, all because it was just kind of there wasn't a clear communication upwards up the chain. It's that narrow blinders thinking that, this an IT issue, I have to fix it, when in reality every single breach impacts the entire organization. And that's one thing I'd like to leave with everybody, is that if you can get in your mind that a security breach or security incident, even though it heavily involves your IT team and heavily involves very technical questions, it doesn't just impact IT. It impacts HR, it impacts financing, it impacts management. It impacts the entire organization.
Yeah, no, I love your story, sadly, but it's true, and it's, you know, again, it's not practice, Carol. It's learning from the mistakes of others. Years ago, when I was director of software engineering at a software manufacturer of Ashton Tate, we had somebody from the Carnegie Mellon come visit us, and they just started their software engineering institute, and we brought him in, and he basically said to management, look, you can either learn from the mistakes that others have made, or you can go make your own. Those are the kind of the two options. And, you know, it's the lessons learned. It's the every day is practice. You know, it's taking, sadly, I mean, I say this, I feel for the IT guy who lost his job because he didn't know any better. I mean, you know, I mean, ignorance is no excuse, but we are all infinitely ignorant that way as human beings, I think. You know, so I feel for him, feel for the business as well that didn't have a clue. You know, so in all of those cases, I want to jump on to, we've alluded to kind of connecting the dots, tabletop planning exercises. I mean, so you spend the time, you build your plan, you got that last page, you know who you're going to call, you got your attorney listed, maybe your forensics company, certainly your insurance company, you've got a list of all your IT service providers, all the cloud-based, you know, where you're storing information and have administrative contacts and all of that set up. But is it all going to work right? What are we missing? Are we going to know who to call when we're going to call? I mean, what's the right time we stop and say, wait a minute, we got to call Scott? You know, tabletop exercises can be fabulous ways of practicing. Again, that same retired Army colonel has a little piece online, just the way the military prepares for an event before they go into battle. It's phenomenal. I mean, they practice and they practice and they practice, and when they're through, they practice some more. And that same attitude taken towards your incident response plan, that's going into battle. You know, that's when we got to dust this thing off and make it real. So I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about that. And Scott, I'm going to jump to you because I know you and I have talked before about tabletops and their importance, but you shed some light, Carol. We're going to spend, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 minutes on this subject. So let's get started.
Certainly. So I'll jump in. So what is tabletop exercise? Tabletop exercises are simply basically a practice run through. We take your incident response plan that you've developed in advance, and we walk through a scenario. It could be ransomware, it could be phishing, any number of incidents, and we basically practice going through the incident response plan. Now there are some that are very technical and really get into the weeds of, you know, computer systems and the stuff that you need to take offline and recovery steps. And then there's some that are more high level that are geared towards your entire incident response team, including management, you know, accounting, HR, etc. So they're important for a number of different reasons. First and foremost, they help practice so that you understand who to go to, who to call, what needs to be done in the overall incident response process. I treat it very much like a fire drill. So, you know, if everybody knows a fire drill, you go through those buildings, you evacuate the buildings, and you ask anybody like, oh yeah, what are we doing in the fire drill? Oh, same thing we did last year. You know, we walk downstairs, we go stand in this corner and we count up everybody. I mean, people know what it is, but you still do it. And the reason why is because it builds that muscle memory. It's so that when you're not freaking out in the middle of something, you know, okay, this is what I need to do. This is who I need to call. So that's why they're important. In terms of who participates, Like I said, there's two of them. There's two style tabletops that I've seen, ones that are more highly technical, and then the ones that are more general for the incident response team. I would say that, you know, you can alternate them in terms of how frequency, have one that's very technical one year, have one that's more generic the next year, but you really should be doing them on an annual basis is ideal. If you can't do that, then, you know, biannual, it would be the bare minimum, but it's really important that you're doing them on a regular basis, just to refresh your memory and refresh, you know, who to contact. There is a I've done many incident response plans, and sometimes you look at that appendix in the back and you say, well, you know, so and so is not with the company anymore, or that email address is not valid because that employee is not there anymore. Oh, well, who are we going to call now? Or in many situations, maybe you went and had a renewal process with your insurance company, and now you're working with a different policy. So maybe you've got a different notice process for that. So it really highlights the need and why you need to really focus on doing those on a regular basis.
Yeah. Well, Carol, jump in with
Yeah, no,
your perspective. Yeah.
absolutely. And we've
Yeah.
we've had a couple of different kinds, like you said. We've had one run by our cyber insurer, and I think that really helped in by our chancellor's office. So CalPoly Pomona is part of the California State University system, 23 campuses. So we brought all 23 campuses together. So it was very high level, but it helped campuses understand really the process and procedures that, you know, goes back to the don't handle it on your own. Make sure, you know, we contact the mothership, I call it, right? And how to escalate, and, you know, and the legal counsel's role and responsibility, risk management's role and responsibility. Because a lot of times, you know, what you find in technology is that they think it's like we've been talking about, that it's a technology problem, and our technologists, you know, like to stay in their little silos, right? And to solve the problems like we've been talking about. They forget that this is an organizational problem, again, like we've been talking about, and risk management needs to be involved, legal counsel, and all these other organizations. And that's a really important lesson of the tabletop, right? And getting everybody on board with that. And then on the technical ones that we did, you know, we are in the midst of changing a lot of our infrastructure. So, you know, we brought in an external provider, had him conduct the team conduct the tabletop exercise, you know, through a ransomware, very specific ransomware incident, and through multiple injects, they call it, right? You know, like, hey, your service desk just gets this call, right? You know, I can't log in, right? Or I got this message on my screen. How do you handle it? Who do you contact, right? And they challenge every response that your team is handling and how they're handling it. How do you log in? Where do you get that information? What happens if that's down? What do you do next? Right. And we made sure that the team was very small, very tight. We had leaders in the room from each of our areas, including the service desk, making sure that we had all the representation. How do you handle communication? Wait a minute, you're not communicating to the outside. Who's handling that? And they challenged us every step of the way. And I really believe in outside facilitation, because I don't think you can challenge yourself as well when it's internal. It's a little bit too incestuous.
Yeah, that's a good point. Our company we do tabletops with our clients, and having that external view. And it goes back even in my early days in cybersecurity, where some of my work was working as a consultant in software engineering projects, where our company, in a couple of instances, MITRE at one time, TRW, which no longer exists, in another, we would be, our role would be the outside perspective on a project just for that purpose. And it really does make a difference that way when you've got, particularly when we do these now, because our clients are small, and they'll have an IT service provider almost always. So just getting the IT service provider and maybe the chief operating officer, chief financial officer, and the owner of a company, a little 20, 30, 40 person company. And it's like you talk muscle memory. These are muscles that have never been used before. Yeah, nobody's ever raised these questions and kind of took them through the scenario of what could happen. And I love the phrase, Scott, of muscle memory, and all the way that all kind of hangs together. Still once a year. I mean, I'm beginning to think there's so many incidents and so many things you can prepare against.
Yeah.
I'd like to see these more often than once a year.
Yeah. Well, except when you have to factor in the cost of an outside provider to come and do that, it starts to be a bit much. But I believe that there's a number of free resources, including through CISA, that offers kind of free tabletop scenarios for those entities or companies that want to do their own internal exercises. I would still recommend, like you, to have an outside party come and assist with that on an annual basis, but to have something more frequent, you can utilize one of those for a more cost efficient process.
That's certainly if you're in critical infrastructure, CISA can help you. One of the places where our pilot program, where we want to take it, after we do basic implementation of cybersecurity controls, and we're thinking the NIST cybersecurity framework, basic governance stuff there, the work of the Cyber Readiness Institute, if you know them, which is real basic, literally, let's get a foundation set, build an incident response plan as well of that, and we see that as, for the pilot program, about a 6-month effort to do that, and that's what the pilot program will cover. But then our vision for what comes after, we're doing the pilot in groups of cohorts of 5. So we have 5 companies in a cohort working together collaboratively. Once we get each cohort finished, is now to start having ongoing continuing education for a business, a quarterly event most likely. And amongst those quarterly events, do tabletop competition, cohort against cohort against cohort, and let the cohorts grade each other, even as a way of community building. I mean, we really see this as a place where we want to take the community, because we just think the value of this, particularly, again, we're talking small businesses. They can't afford you, Scott, to come in. It's often hard once a year, even.
And I encourage you to work with, I'll pick on CalPoly Pomona, but I know other CSUs. And then obviously ISACA, your organization, use the free resources that are available to you. We have student teams that work with, high schools as well. We do red teaming and stuff like that, but, like we have an advanced auditing class that are always looking for projects, always. And they can be great resources to small businesses. And help. I mean, I use the teams all the time to help me with projects. So
we need to talk offline on how we can get our
absolutely.
One of the places I like to go to is if you're new. So, and this may be some of your clients, so that I'm looking at the audience. If your clients are all new to this and they're small, they don't have resources, the Cyber Readiness Institute's a nonprofit that has a real good entry-level introduction to cybersecurity. So, as I say, if those of you in AITP to take this to your clients, if they could benefit from, just get started, and it includes in it a basic incident response plan that they'll develop there. I want to, in the interest of time, it's going on close to 7. Let's spend a couple minutes talking about mistakes organizations make. We've already done some of that over the course of the evening, but let's do that. And also, if you're interested, if you've got something to say about what we're talking about, you want to add to the conversation, 2 things I'd ask. One, go on video and raise your hand, and then I'll start just moving around as I see hands being raised, bring you into the conversation as well. I would only say that, brevity is a virtue, which we're trying to do, all of us here. And if you join us in the conversation, the same. Let's, try to do that. We got about a half hour left. So first, starting, and Carol, I'm going to start with you because you've already given us several mistakes, Scott, that people have made. What are some of the, oh my God, things that maybe you have seen that we haven't talked about?
I think people forget about the basics. We want to make this all complicated. Patch, right? Go back to your basic controls, right? Preventative controls that we can all do, right? Patch our systems, change your passwords. MFA, that's in a lot of the resources I've been putting links to, right? I joke, right? They're not breaking in, right? They're getting in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And they're getting in through vulnerabilities that are unpatched. They're getting in through passwords that we're not changing, that we're giving away, right? So go back to our basic controls and use that, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people are doing a lot of hard stuff, right? But go back to our basics first. And that goes even to our homes, right? I tell everybody my mother-in-law is the best clicker there is. She clicks on all of those emails and stuff, right? We talked about education, educating our users. They're our front door. People are afraid to use our users as a control, right? But they're the only chance we got.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? But that's the mistake we're making, is we're not using the basic stuff that we have available to us. And then if you look at what the administration is, the White House and the administration, that's what they've been doing the last couple of years, is putting more onus on companies to basically go back to basics, right? Making sure that, we're patching our systems and all of that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And for us, we're requiring MFA for everybody.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean that they're not tricking our users into MFA, what we call MFA fatigue, right? If I push you enough, you're just going to, clear that MFA. That's another training issue.
That's right. Yeah. And there's so much of that training issue as well. We have, on the personal side, the family side, we Secure the Village, have a baker's dozen of controls, starting with 5 basic ones. First of which, nothing we've talked about tonight, because it has nothing to do with businesses so much, but every person, every family, freeze your credit as a fundamental protection against identity theft. That's our number one. But then the other 12 are managing what we're talking about throughout all the stuff, MFA and patching and so on. Scott, yeah, jump in.
Oh, certainly. So I'll break it down between technical and more administrative steps and mistakes that are made. So I echo Carol's comments. MFA is the way to go. But not only that, but you have to train employees on not just the security incidents, but the risks to the organization. They need to know about the types of scams, the wire fraud, the social engineering. You need to do those phishing exercises. That at a bare minimum will encompass a good 30% of the breaches that have occurred. Second, is to be on top of patching your systems, making sure that you have the latest and greatest updates, latest firmware. I can't tell you how many times we've had an incident where we turned out that, they got in because of a vulnerability that they issued a patch 2 weeks ago. It's like, I was going to get to it, or, for whatever reason. Patching those vulnerabilities can go a long way to addressing the vulnerabilities that are out there. So and then by all means, make sure you're having your endpoint monitoring software, your antivirus software, your firewalls properly configured. If you do all of those things, you're going to be protected against the vast majority of security incidents. I'll leave you with on the administrative side. I already talked about understanding the risks to the organization. And preparing for that, whether knowing who to call, having an incident response plan. The other recommendation I would leave you with is take a close look at the data that you're collecting and that you're using, and understand, do you really need to collect all that data? Do you really need, all that information? I had a client of mine, I give the story all the time, that email account was breached. We figured out that this one email account had something like 50 gigabytes of data because it was the secretary to the founder of the company, and she'd been with the company for like 30 years. And every aspect, every customer, every file, every employee information was all in that email account. And it really didn't need to be. It could have been, maintained, offline and just had a year worth of email to be easily accessible. And that would have greatly limited the scope of the incident. I have another client and where they're currently in the midst of a lawsuit. And the reason why is because they provided full social security numbers to one of their consultants. Well, the consultant had the data breach. It didn't impact my client at all, but the result was the consultant said, "Hey, in the future, we're not going to collect social security numbers anymore." Well, the plaintiff's class action bar discovered that. They love that statement because they said, well, if you don't need it now, you didn't need it before.
Right.
And, and
it.
you go to my clients, the client's like, well, why did you provide this information to this consultant? He didn't really need it. And they said, well, it was on the form that they sent us. And nobody questioned whether they needed it or not. They just were using it as an identifier. And lo and behold, that was the one piece of personal information that they provided was breached, and all of a sudden now requires notification and defending a big lawsuit. So data minimization can go a long way to reducing the risk, so that if a breach does happen, the impact is much smaller.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I go on that bandwagon all the time. And the thing I keep hearing is I collecting it just in case.
Yeah.
Right. Got it. No.
Yeah. Well, I had that discussion this morning. I was in a different meeting, different group, and one of the people there said, I've got like 10 years worth of client information. I've got, these are cases that I worked on. She's an accountant 10 years ago. And it's like, okay, take it off the system. If you really think you need to save it on a USB in a safe deposit box. You don't need it online. I mean, just begin
But
thinking.
what's the retention, right? Go back to whatever your retention policy, standard laws
That's
are,
right.
right?
Yeah. And some of her stuff, she has to, has to hold that. Part of what I'm hearing from both of you, and in terms of the biggest mistake organizations make seems to be a failure to protect. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Benjamin Franklin was, said, it's that ounce of prevention. Patching. I mean, to me, patching is like obvious. Not that it's easy in a larger organization, and you got to manage patching because you may not have the resources to get to everything. So you got to navigate that space, but it's still fundamental. If you're in a small organization, or again, a home user, we have is now Secure the Village. It used to be a Citadel publication, but every Sunday since 2008, we have published for free a cybersecurity news of the week and weekend patch report. Here's basic programs that need patching that we all use in our homes, which is
but oftentimes people have older technologies that are no longer patchable, and it's going to cost them money to upgrade it. I listen to KFI on the weekends, and and their tech report on the weekend, and that's a lot of what you hear is people go, well, I can't patch it anymore because it's too old, and I can't afford to upgrade my technology, or I don't want to because my favorite program is X. And in organizations, it's the same financial decisions that they're making. And, you know, my boss calls me the whistleblower, right? But I present the cost of the risk and I review and advise, right? I don't own those decisions, right? The leadership does, right? So I just present the risk to them, like, you know, you want to do this. This is what it's, and I'm sure that's what Scott does too, right? He doesn't own those decisions. He just tells them what it's going to cost them, right? If that breach does occur, right? If you don't patch, this is what's going to happen. And like you said, it's a resume generating event, right? And in a home, you know, or in a small business, that's a closure, right? And how many businesses have we seen that have closed and not reopened, right?
Yeah.
You know? And unfortunately, people think that technology is a one-time events, investment. They don't realize that it's a recurring investment. We used to buy phones, on our desk, and it was a one-time purchase. So we have to help people understand that these are subscriptions now, right? They're recurring investments. And now, when we make, budget requests, we have to show that it's a recurring cost. And people still have not accepted that technology is a recurring cost.
Yeah. As well as security. As I'm listening to you, one of my favorite cybersecurity metaphor, I think, is the looking at cybersecurity today and thinking about what it was like 100 years ago with the automobile when we first started driving, and we didn't have safe cars because we didn't know what it was to build a safe car even.
What was a seatbelt, right?
Right. We didn't have traffic lights. We didn't have trained drivers. We didn't have roads that were built for, 60-mile-an-hour curves and, all the, IPv6 stuff in technology terms that we're moving to. And we're kind of in that situation right now. To me, it's like being in the 1930s, that same way. And even just thinking about it that way, I find it's kind of liberating in that it helps one see just where we are and how far we have to go, and just the challenges we face, and again how that brings to us as individuals. I mean, again, the IT folks, you're like the mechanics of the cars back 100 years ago. You got to keep them running and running safely. But again, the future is already here. It's just not evenly
And if
distributed.
we keep fixing it and it's not fixable, right? There's a point where we have a responsibility to tell them that this is not patchable.
Yeah. And this is part of, again, what I'm seeing out of the administration with the Biden-Harris National Cybersecurity Strategy and Plan, that we ultimately have got to push hard on the IT manufacturers, the software developers that build security in, build privacy in. If I get into an accident in the car, I've got the seat, the bag is going to naturally explode and protect me. Well, what do you have on your desktop that when it gets hit, some corresponding equivalent, safety thing opens up? We're still building that. And in some sense, you in IT are in the worst possible position of all of this, because you're changing metaphors. You're on the ramparts. You got to keep the cars moving, because you manage a whole fleet of cars, and the business needs those fleet of cars to do its work. And they're not secure. You got to continually. I mean, what would it be like if we had to take our cars in once a month on Car Fix Tuesday to take our cars to the dealer and let them do stuff? I mean, in some sense, that's ludicrous that we have to do this with our technology, but we do. That's the reality.
And that they limit it. They limited us to such a short life cycle, right? When actually the technology can handle a lot more than what they've given us. Yeah,
that's right. So we got to make that push. And to me, this gets right into the intersection of our political battles And part of what I think those of us here in the community have to do is have this discussion, make sure we get up above the battles, that we're really talking about, these are people's lives that's at risk here. The students, Carol, that you talk about, these are lives that are being damaged and destroyed. And that's a
We have a
responsibility.
digital divide. We
Yeah.
we don't acknowledge it. We think that that was a problem, 40 years ago, but that digital divide still exists.
Oh, totally. And today, this will be a story in Sunday's news, because I just saw the news story today. The Aspen Institute had a conference on cybersecurity in the world of AI. What's that going to look like? And again, they talked about the cyber divide between the big companies who can use AI for defense versus the little companies that have AI used against them. I'm looking at what do you envision for the future of cybersecurity? How would AI impact that? We just got into that discussion. If Carol, Scott, if one of you wanted to jump in on that question first. Yeah. What do you see? Yeah.
So number one, so AI is already in use in a lot of different respects already. You can describe it as kind of behavioral analysis for breach detection, intrusion detection. So it's only going to get better on the defensive side. But where I also see there being a future, and it's already starting to come into play, is AI being used from an offensive perspective, using AI to find vulnerabilities in code very quickly and being able to exploit those. So, just at a high level, that's where I see the biggest threat from an AI perspective. The other thing that you're finding is that AI is also kind of addresses the low level threat actors' greatest weakness, and that is kind of this lack of English speaking skills, lack of being able to clearly articulate and social engineer people. The vast majority of phishing campaigns are coming out of non-English speaking countries, and in the good ones will have very few errors. But AI is just going to make that so much easier, make it almost like a fluid English speaker, and so that's going to be another threat on the horizon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just put in a ISACA white paper related to AI that you guys might enjoy. It's got a lot of good stuff, if you're looking at AI for your organization, and some controls and guardrails that you might consider. And AI's been around for a long time. In my undergrad, we were looking at Turing, right? And if you haven't seen the movie, the Imitation Game, it's a great movie.
Yeah.
And we have AI in our homes, right? With Alexa. Thank God Alexa's not in here. She'd be answering me right now, right? And in cybersecurity, there are many tools already that already incorporate AI. It's just right now it's the buzzword being used, right? There's our SIEMs already use it. A lot of our tools are already aggregating and pulling together threat feeds and with our log information, right? And giving us alerts based on that, right? And, the only thing with ChatGPT is it had the natural language model that it's pulling together and getting smarter. The things that we have to worry about is what data are we giving it, right? People are cutting and pasting a lot of information. It's pulling together our emails. And, it's getting smarter with a lot more practical data. And our threat actors are using that information as well and using artificial intelligence against us, like, Scott was referencing. So, we've got to be careful. And then, I got to worry about, our staff, right? They're very excited about it. And obviously our researchers are very excited about it, right? And so I got to be worried about what research they're doing and what they're feeding it. As well in our organization. Some organizations are choosing to block it. We just had our webinar at ISACA-LA yesterday. You can go to our website. We'll have the recording posted in a week. And gave a great presentation last night about it. And he talked about, how they're actually using a proxy server to kind of review those requests going to like ChatGPT so that those are reviewed. going in and out, so they're not totally blocking it. So a lot to consider with AI.
Yeah. Boy, to me, you understated it when you said a lot to consider. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
our leaders are beyond excited,
Oh,
right? It's
yeah.
the latest new toy, and all they see is the bright, shiny object,
Yeah.
right? And so, I'm like, wow, slow down, right? Because they see the promise, right?
Yeah.
Not
Oh,
the peril.
I mean, when I read how, and I forget who it was, used AI to identify every possible protein that might exist. So now we can begin looking through those proteins for things that can help our health. It's like, my God, what an opportunity, this kind of stuff is. The other side, watch the Imitation Game is great. Highly recommend it. I'm old enough, and my background being mathematics, I'm one of, I don't know how many people that's actually read Turing's original paper on what would it be for a computer to
It's been many years, but yeah,
yeah.
in my class. Have you guys heard of Dan Do Anything Now in Chat GPT? Basically takes away the guardrails.
Are we doing?
Yeah, put the link of the paper. And it's what is Dan? But basically, there's a great YouTube video of a oh my gosh, it's a journalist, and he's doing a news broadcast, and he invokes Dan, and he does prompts without Dan and then with Dan, and he asks Dan who he is, and Dan returns with all of his private information through Chat GPT. I thought the guy was going to have a heart attack.
Wow.
But when you get a chance,
Yeah.
do some research on Dan, and then if you're not already freaked out, it'll pretty well take you over the edge.
Okay. It's good that it's getting later in the evening, which means it'll be soon appropriate for a strong glass of wine or something stronger, given where this discussion, the dystopian place that this discussion could lead us. But back to today, where we've got all of these challenges, I've seen a number that phishing attacks are up like 1,200% since ChatGPT and all, and they're so much easier or so much harder to detect as well. Let's begin to wrap it up. Final thoughts, Scott and Carol. I don't know, Scott, you want to jump first? Yeah.
Final thoughts. I'd like to just reiterate kind of the recommendations that we had. So, first and foremost, recognize and understand that you have that there are risks. There are serious risks in the cybersecurity incident. Appreciate the fact that it's going to be a matter of time. It's when, not if, you experience a data breach, and so because of that, take steps to try to prepare it. There are plenty of resources. I chuckled every time Carol had put in a link, because it seemed like she had a link for everything. But there's so many good resources there that are really inexpensive and can help you, better prepare for an incident. Identify resources out there that help in the event of an incident. Those third parties. Look for a breach counsel, talk to your insurance carrier, identify forensic firms, so that when that time comes, you're inevitably ready. And then look to ways in which you can improve your security with the recommendations that Carol made, and in terms of MFA, and then consider the recommendations I made in terms of data minimization. And that's going to put you in the best possible starting point for security. And then from there, it's a matter of staying on top of new developments, new attacks, and then regularly testing yourselves and your organization with tabletop exercises.
Yeah, well said, Carol. Yeah.
Yeah, I only have the links because I teach an information security class, And that's my only way to keep my sanity. And it's really about keeping it simple. Analysis paralysis is, I think, what scares people, right? Is they think that you have to do everything. Just do something, right? Just take some steps forward. I'm a big proponent of the serenity prayer, right? And it's not about, the religious aspect of the serenity prayer, right? But it's really about doing what you can, right?
Yeah.
And so finding what you can do and take those steps forward that you can do, and finding your village. And this organization is part of your village. There's other professional organizations out there to reach out to also,
Right.
and I recognize that this is a big problem, and we are not alone. And there's a lot of resources out there. That's why every time somebody had a question, I didn't want them to leave feeling that they didn't have an answer and that they were alone. So that's why I'm quick to find a link.
Yeah, that's so important. And I think as well, so beautifully said, Carol, that we're not alone in this. We are all together. That's part of the Secure the Village vision as well. From my sense, the wrap up is, I mean, I look at the 14 of you now, the 25 or so who are here at the beginning, that you've got two roles to play, if you will. One, you may be the owner of your own company, or a leader in your own company, and there's your company to protect. And hopefully tonight has helped you see more clearly what's involved in doing that. And to Carol's point, don't try to boil the ocean. Take it a day at a time, a step at a time. Because that's the only way you can realistically do this stuff. And then the other thing that I would leave you with as well, to the extent you have opportunities, and even to the extent that you can create opportunities to talk to your clients, they're so often the ones, because they don't, on the one side, they don't understand IT, and they don't understand information security. They're business people, they're manufacturers, they're lawyers, they're accountants, they're whatever it is they're doing. But they're not technical, and they're certainly not security technical. So anything you can do to help them get this, help them prepare, help them do all those things that Carol and Scott talked about, patching and, awareness training and all the tabletops and so on. Help them, because you've got that leverage with them. You may have that leverage. I know IT service providers, and I know some of their clients where you have no leverage, and you're as frustrated by that as, as sometimes we are when we can't get people to listen to us. But to the extent you can get them, do that. And to the extent you can't, you're part of a community. Let's talk together and let's find ways that we can do objection handling in that classical sense. What do you say when the client says no? How do you navigate that space? I mean, that's part of what we're looking to do in our pilot program as well, which is why, in part, I'm so excited by it. And take a look at that. I mean, if that makes sense to you, please participate in it with us. It's on our website, securethevillage.org. But even separate from that, anything you can do to help your clients.
And
Get
maybe
it.
just turning on auto patching on their
Yeah.
workstations, right? That's
Yeah.
one step better than they were yesterday.
That's
Or
right.
like EJ said, right? I'm not a big fan of putting things on mobile storage, because somebody
Yeah.
can pick that up and go. But if that's what it takes, and having them put it in a lockbox, it's
Mhm.
better than they were the day before, right?
Yeah,
If you could just leave them better than when you came.
that's right. Yeah, if you can't do 100%, but you can do 60%, well, 60% is better than zero.
Right.
Yeah. Final words, as I'm looking, 7:27. Jay, I think we nailed it in terms of time.
Right on time.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Take
Wow.
over. Back to you, Jay.
Yeah. Wow. I thought it was such a wonderful discussion. I think I really feel like everyone was able to leave with a lot of takeaways, a lot of it being mindset. And so truly we're so happy that you guys were here to share your knowledge and wisdom and insights and from a lot of different perspectives. So thank you guys for doing that for us today. For the members still on this call, I'm going to share a link for you guys to provide us a little feedback on how the event went. Give me one moment. It'll be a link that is in the chat. Oh, it looks like it's already sent out, so perfect. Feel free to jump on there. And again, thank you guys so much for your time here today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah.
It always helps reground me, make sure I'm on the right track, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, AITP-LA, definitely. Thank you. Cool.
Good.
Thank you. Thanks,
Good
everyone.
night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you guys.